We're back. All right. Now, our second talk of the day is, as you see on screen, it's called 5 Years of OT Security Assessments, Horror Show, Myths, and Practical Advice to Improve Security and Safety. We want to welcome Derek Dunkel-Jahan and Justin Turner for this talk. Let me remind our attendees, you can ask questions using the Q&A feature if there's time at the end, or if they want to do it during. Our speakers will take your questions that way. And then they've agreed to head over to Discord, to their talks channel, and answer more questions and interact with you there. Take it away.
Hi, this is Justin. It looks like I am not able to join on video, so I don't know if there's a way that we can. Looks like Derek's maybe having the same problem when we try to start video. Can you hear me audio-wise okay?
Yes, I can, Justin.
We sure can.
All right. So let me. I will share my screen again here, and we can work on video and get started on the intros while we wait on that. I'll keep kind of clicking and see if I can get this video going as we get rolling. But excited to join you all today. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with you about operational technology security. It's something that Derek and I are both really passionate about, and have been spending a lot of time in the last several years focusing on assisting companies in evaluating security risks around their operational technology and helping set a roadmap for better security and safety. And so this isn't a heavy, death by PowerPoint or academic type of a presentation today. Really what we wanted to do is just kind of do a bit of a brain dump and talk about the things that we've been seeing, and basically just kind of our tales from the field and the things that we've learned, things that we've seen that have worked, things that we've seen not work, or some large risks or vulnerabilities we've seen in our clients. And so that's kind of what we're going to walk through today. So if we'll do some quick intros. We'll level set on what is IT versus OT and how there's some differences there. The inherent vulnerability and the vulnerable nature of those devices themselves, and often the networks they are connected to. We'll show you some of the scary things we've seen just in the last 12 to 18 months, some of the sort of the pictures and anecdotes that we've pulled together to share with you today. And then Derek's going to kind of go through what are some of the things that we have heard and that have sort of myths that we have debunked, right? Or some things that you commonly hear as pushback or adversity to moving the needle on maturing operational technology security, and how we can sort of move past those potential roadblocks, and then just a very practical roadmap of what are some good things that you could be doing now in your organization to help secure those. We didn't pull in the kitchen sink of everything that you could be doing, but a lot of times our clients just ask us hey, we want to make progress in the next 6 months or the next 12 months. What can we do right now? What are some achievable and practical goals? And so we'll go through some of our experiences in that as well. So with that, let me kick to Derek quickly. And Derek, if you'd like to do an intro, and then I'll pick it up from there and go through the next section.
Yeah, absolutely. So Derek Dunkel-Jahan, Associate Director for Protiviti out of our Houston office. I guess it's a good thing you don't have the video of me, because I'm in enemy territory. I have both an A&M and an OU diploma behind me. So luckily, I won't have any virtual tomatoes or anything thrown at me without the video. Been working in OT security for the last 10 years, since I started with an upstream oil and gas company, Devon Energy. Really excited to talk with you guys today. I have attended B-Sides before, and very excited to be a speaker on one of them for the first time. So looking forward to the talk, and looking forward to hearing any questions and comments that you guys have, because this is a very emerging area, both from a regulatory and just from a interest perspective, given the potential impacts. Over to you, Justin.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. So I'm Justin Turner. I'm a director in the cybersecurity practice at Protiviti. I have been with the firm for a little over 11 years now. I have been focused on cybersecurity for the majority of that time, but early in my career, spent some time cutting my teeth on IT audit and some IT SOX sorts of things, general IT controls. I spent a good amount of time as a pen tester as well, so I was doing more offensive activities. And then being based in Houston, we do a ton of work in the energy and utilities industry, and that was really my in into starting to evaluate and advise on operational technology. And then over time, we really started to do things in a number of other industries, including our manufacturing, consumer products and chemicals, even some transportation, right? And a lot of use cases for this technology. So I attended UT Austin. I try to get back to Austin as often as I can. I know we're not all in person today, but excited about future years to be able to get back together physically. So let me move on to just a quick level set on when we say OT, what are we really talking about? So IT in the traditional sense, right? This is what's supporting our business data, our business applications. And so you think about your key enterprise systems, you think about your email, you think about databases, data warehouses, things of that nature. The traditional back office support. Operational technology, these are devices that are connected to a network, but oftentimes they're non-traditional in the sense of we're probably not talking about a Windows server. We're talking about things like programmable logic controllers or flow computers or RTUs, the things that automate the business, right, and automate operations. So in the case of manufacturing, you could have a production line, and there are devices that are automating that line, right? Things that are like sensors, measuring temperature or volume control. There's a lot of individual working components that go into that, and over time, those have become increasingly more connected. We've had more network connected devices. We've moved from manual or pneumatic type of controls, and these are things that we can monitor in real time. We can get data from in real time. We have the ability to remotely control from an iPad from the couch, right? I've kind of seen that in real environments where folks can sort of monitor what's happening on the manufacturing or the production side in a remote capacity. So that's kind of when we start to talk about the IT and OT convergence, which is a very sort of common buzzword or term that you will hear. And really what this is getting at is with the increased connectivity and convenience, we do have additional risks that we need to consider with these devices and these networks, because the impact is pretty high if someone's able to compromise that device. You're talking about something that can directly disrupt your operations, and pretty easy to kind of see how that ties to your bottom line. Why are they vulnerable? When we go through some of our stories and anecdotes here, a lot of this is going to come to light. So I don't know that I want to spend time going through every bullet and reading to you. And I maybe will just go through the headers here. But we have inherently insecure, because in a lot of cases we see that the OEMs, right, the manufacturers or the vendors that create these devices don't always have security at the forefront, right? Even some of the things that are coming out today, newer models, don't necessarily have the highest levels of security. And there you see a lot of legacy devices in these environments, because it can be difficult to replace, because you have to coordinate an outage, or there's a domino effect of other devices and other components that you have to replace if you want to get rid of like your Windows XP machines. So we see a lot of Windows XP out there, a lot of Server 2003 that are supporting those shop floor operations. PLCs from the late 80s or early 90s, I still see those in production environments today. And so, right there, some of this stuff was made before security was even, we didn't even have the internet when some of these things were made and starting to, sort of establish network connections. And then I hit on the previous slide on the increased connectivity. Another vulnerability here, when we talk about lacking collaboration, there in a lot of organizations, what we see is that there is a bit of a power struggle between the folks that are on the IT side and those on the OT side. So your plant managers or even your more technical folks that support the networks and devices in the manufacturing environment. There's either some opposition, opposing ideas there, right? With security being seen by operations as something that inhibits their progress and makes them less efficient. And then you also kind of see a bit of an not apathy, but it's a bit of a black box, right? What's happening in the field. And so I hear a lot of cases where the CISO or the IT organization says, yeah, I don't know what's happening out there, right? The field guys, they buy their own stuff, they set up their own stuff. I don't know what they have. We're not looking at it. And so when you don't have tools, you don't have the same security appliances and network visibility and logs, and you don't have all those things on the OT side that you have on IT, then that kind of leads into the last thing on the far right here, which is we don't have good visibility into those networks. We don't know what we have. We don't even know what our indicators of compromise might be because we don't have a good inventory of what's out there, and we don't have eyes on that because it's just a bit of an unknown, right? Or politically, we haven't been able to work together between these two teams, right? Our enterprise IT or security and the folks in the field to come to a consensus of how can we make this more secure and not impede what needs to happen on the operations side. And then this slide is a bit of a just kind of a level set on why does this matter, right? And I don't think anybody is going to be surprised on this, but one of the things that I find the easier, right, to communicate or tie when you're talking about these risks versus some things on the enterprise IT side is that these outcomes, it's a little bit easier to see, okay, well, if we have an outage of this system, right, or this facility is made unavailable, what is the risk or the financial impact of that? It sometimes can be difficult to say, well, if we lose our AP system for the day, right, what does that really mean, right? For our revenue or AR, if there's certain things we can't recognize, you could probably back into what the financial impact is, but it's a little easier to look at an oil and gas production facility and say, hey, this thing makes us $5 million a day, right? And that facility is unavailable for a day. We pretty sure it's going to cost us $5 million. And so you not only have the financial impacts of production lines or the devices in the field being made unavailable, but you could have financial loss from loss of confidence, right? If you're publicly traded and those breaches need to be disclosed, right? We've got new SEC proposed regulation for public companies around what they need to report on cyber breaches and the timing and how to do so. And so there's costs that are softer around reputational impact or perception in the market, ransom payments that may need to be made. If you could still have some, an attack on your infrastructure lead to the compromise of something like sensitive data. And so you definitely don't want to see an instance where you're paying for breach notifications and credit monitoring services and things like that for your customers. And then,
Justin,
go ahead.
can I jump in really quick? Because there's a really good question in the chat that I think would kind of tie in well to where you're going. Ryan asks, what's going to be the best way for organizations to really get an understanding of what their true attack surface looks like? For the last place I worked at, I know that part of what we did for companies was dig deep on finding an entire attack surface for them. Is there a better way than hiring pen testing consulting firms to get a true grasp of a company's structure?
Yeah, so I'm reading the question as well here. Derek, why don't you start? I know we've got some things in here. We start to talk about our sort of our roadmap that I think are going to go for like, what are the things that we're going to, how do we enumerate the risks, and then what are our practical solutions? I know you're going to cover that. So anything you kind of want to share as a bit of a preview for what you're going to cover later?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I kind of think about the attack surface from an organization with critical infrastructure or OT, this slide's a really good landing spot, because it's what is the business risk that you're trying to reduce and mitigate? Is it financial loss, production capability, impacts to health safety? So I'm going to pick let's say I'm a oil and gas company and my main concern is negative impacts to health and safety. Then I'm going to be focusing my initial attack surface on those safety instrument systems, the things that, if compromised, could make things go boom in our oil fields. I also would look at, and we go through this later on in the presentation, but I kind of go through a continuum of like, what are the risks that are most likely to cause an incident? So first, it's what's remotely accessible. If anything is remotely accessible from your site, that is your stop what you're doing, get that secured and taken off the internet if possible. After you have your internet accessible attack surface, then go to like remote access, VPN, and segmentation between IT, OT, and just kind of moving down the attack surface stack. And there are tools out there like Clarity, Nozomi, Dragos that can help you get a understanding of your actual asset footprint within an environment. And those tools are really good at doing that. But I'd say from an attack surface perspective, I'd think outside in. Justin, is there anything you'd add on to that?
No, I think that's a great overview. And I think one of the things we want to, when we get to sort of our last section, when we talk about, again, emphasizing the practical remediation, we see a lot of our clients that get sort of stuck on, here's everything I have to do. Like they'll go find the NIST, 800-82 framework for securing, industrial control systems and OT, and say, I need to go do these 200 things, and I have 100 facilities. And there's a bit of a paralysis of like, how are we going to do all this? We don't have enough people. And not that any of those things are bad things. But Derek's point is a great one, which is there are certain things that bubble above others. And if you look at instances in case studies from OT attacks and breaches over the last several years, we have a couple of them highlighted here. There are definitely some themes that emerge, right? It is an email compromise. Somebody clicks on a phishing email, right? And then they don't have maybe all of the network segmentation that they should have, and someone's able to pivot into the operational and technology environment, right? So you don't often think about security awareness and needing to train your users and how that can impact operations, because it feels like it's maybe a little further removed from that. But logically, there are sometimes paths to get there, right? USBs and having sort of not a lot of control or security around removable media in these environments. There's a couple of case studies you could highlight where somebody plugged something in and it resulted in a compromise or an outage. And so we'll walk through a couple more examples, but but I think what I typically recommend is let's look at, like Derek said, remote access. Let's look at the most 5-6 most likely avenues where we could get impacted and compromised, and let's ensure that we're locking those things down, and let's do that first before we start worrying about other things, because the other things are just going to build on that and enhance our maturity, and just create more points of mitigation if one of those other methods is compromised. But we have to lock down we got to take the log me in and the things like that off of the shop floor PCs, right? We've got to start with those things, and we've got to get the vendor appliances that someone drops out there and they have a VPN connection right directly into our OT network, and we're not governing that connection. We don't know who from the vendor. We don't know how secure it is, but we know they have a remote connection point. We need to inventory and make sure that those are secure. And so those are just a couple of things. That's a great question. I appreciate it, and certainly we welcome any additional questions as we go through this. Before I move on from this slide, the last thing I don't want to discount here is the health and safety of employees, right? And we, again, I don't want to downplay the impacts of an attack on a business network or an enterprise network. There's certainly hassles, and there's costs, and there's inconveniences associated with that. But we're probably not worried about anything detrimental happening to somebody physically if we lose our financial reporting system, or we lose email. In the case of compromise of an operational technology environment, particularly if it's a motivated attacker that knows a little bit about the environment, is looking to cause disruption or even harm, you have potential loss of life here. And so we're talking about something very, very real, and it's impossible to put a price tag on that. And so you're right at the ground floor of some systems that, again, Derek mentioned safety systems. There are safety mechanisms built into many of these devices. Some of the older historical stuff, it doesn't have that, or those safety mechanisms sometimes fail. There might be ways to bypass those. And so it's definitely not something that you want to gloss over. And that's certainly a risk to highlight here, which is, if we are creating or refining hazardous materials or chemicals, we need to make sure that our cybersecurity is strong, and that doesn't lead to something like an environmental event, like a spill or an explosion or something along those lines. Okay, so I'm going to transition to the next section here, which is just a couple of photos we've taken from some of the engagements and we've done over the past. Most of these have been taken in the past year, to be honest. And so I won't spend a lot of time on these. If you have been working in the OT world for any amount of time, you have seen the passwords posted somewhere, right? I probably have 100 different pictures I could have used here. I grabbed sort of the ones that were the most accessible or the most recent, but it is very common to see passwords written down places when you start to walk around on a shop floor, or you're out, in the field with a pipeline organization or oil and gas. I think the most memorable example of this that I have personally is I was in West Texas with an upstream drilling oil and gas company, and it was actually one of their plants or their midstream facilities. And so I walk in, the gates open, right? You could just drive in, and there's several portable buildings and trailers around. And I walk into one of them, and it's like a bit of a makeshift control room. And there's a PC in the room, right in the middle of the room, and there's a whiteboard on the wall. And it has what looks kind of like a password on it. So I walk in and I say, the person that's giving me the tour, I said, please tell me that's not a valid password. And they were like, well, it might be. So I get on the system, and I think they were using Delta V, Emerson's Delta V, which is a pretty common industrial control system sort of application that we see in the field. So I was able to log in with that password, and I was like, okay, well, I have full control of the facility now, right? And so, it's just this wasn't a social engineering type of an exercise that I was doing, but it sort of got me thinking. It got the rest of their organization thinking. Somebody drives out there in an F-250 with a hard hat on and some flame resistant gear, and sort of looks the part, right? There's a lot of people coming in and out of this facility. It's pretty big. Walks into this building. I mean, you can shut the whole facility down from there with a password that's on the whiteboard. And you could do that literally in 5 minutes. And so that picture ended up being something that was pretty impactful. Went to very high levels in the organization, and they sort of said, look, we have to get better about this. We know that most people that work here and work at the facility might have access to that shared password or that shared account, but we do have to think about the risk of somebody coming in that doesn't belong there, or a disgruntled user or an employee. So definitely risks associated with this. And given this audience, I don't know that anybody's going to disagree. And they're not all created equal. Some of these accounts may be more benign, but even then, thinking back to my days as a pen tester, we would absolutely use any little foothold we had, even if it was for intelligence gathering, right, or intel and surveillance that we could potentially use. We see a lot of non-standard devices in the field. Devices that maybe are not, if they're a Cisco shop, certain devices that one facility, somebody decided to purchase it, or went over to Best Buy and bought a Netgear Nighthawk and plugged it in. And it's this one, I think in particular, was also running, was broadcasting with web, which that protocol has been deprecated, I think, for over 10 years now. And so you have, one of the risks is you have folks with a P card or with the ability to go procure their own devices, and they're well-intentioned, and there's probably a reason that they need the device. There's probably a use case there. But again, I talked about lack of collaboration and coordination earlier. This is definitely one of the outcomes of that, which is they're not security folks. They don't know how to secure these devices. It's not that they're trying to make things insecure. It's that somebody who's an I&E tech, right, is just going to kind of plug this thing in, and if they can connect to it and get whatever other devices they need to connect to it, then that works. These devices specifically, if I remember correctly, these were dropped in by a third party who helps provide, at this particular manufacturing site, helps provide some support. And they were using these as remote access points, and they kind of had their own network out there. And no one sort of on the enterprise, shared service, IT or security team, knew that this was happening. So right, we have this rogue network there with these devices that are unmanaged, and really there's not an inventory noting that these devices even exist. We also see a lot of examples of when we do have Windows systems out in the field, for good reason. We should, we often don't see and don't have a use case for having internet, from being able to get out to the internet from the field or from our operations side. And so you're not going to be able to have, automated updates. You're going to be able to set auto update in Windows. And so patching is absolutely a challenge. I don't want to act like it isn't. It's often a manual and painful process. But this is an example of, and again, these were both taken just a couple months, maybe like in May or June, a little bit earlier this year. So you're talking about some Windows devices, like a Windows 7 workstation that hasn't been patched in 10 years, passwords that haven't been reset in 11 years, that sort of control the entire facility. And you've had a lot of people, if you envision, have come in and out of that facility in the last 11 years that likely know what that password is. And so definitely we see this a lot in environments. And then, you gotta love the internet access for a machine. This was also a manufacturing client that they were very adamant that they did not have internet access on the shop floor, and we were able to disprove that pretty quickly, and even were able to see some of the recent searches and things that folks had seemingly been watching from some of those machines on the floor. And so a lot of risk with these having internet access, where somebody maybe is more likely to click on a malicious link or visit a malicious site or download something. And if we don't have our security tools on those machines and visibility, then that could be sort of the thing that results in a compromise of a site and possibly, our entire enterprise. And then the last thing I wanted to include here, not directly cybersecurity. We don't often think about it, but this is sort of a growing, an emerging area around cyber, which is the concept of resiliency. And we have a lot of other things that can cause an outage, and it's going to be hard for us to isolate whether something's a cybersecurity incident or maybe it's an environmental type of an incident if we've got a bunch of trash next to our network rack that could possibly catch fire, right? And not good temperature controls. We've got rat's nest of cables, and we have to troubleshoot, and we're not able to sort that out easily. We've got sprinklers and evident water damage in ceiling tiles right above where we sort of have all of our networking and local compute for our facilities. And so this concept is certainly sort of over the last couple of years has been woven in a lot tighter with cybersecurity and this concept of operational resiliency. So I definitely wanted to kind of show a couple of examples of some things that we've seen from that side as well. Let me kick to Derek. There's a couple of other things here that we don't necessarily have pictures of or good illustrative examples of, but some things that we often see. I mentioned asset inventory being something that the majority of companies that we walk into have no idea what they have in their OT environment. And I highlight a couple of these other things as well earlier around user security awareness. You ask folks, hey, if there was a breach, like if you on your operator workstation in the control room, if you saw like a mouse moving and people changing stuff, and like, what would you do, right? And we hear a lot of, well, I guess I'd call IT. Okay, well, who in IT, right? Do you have a contact? Like, and it's in a lot of environments, it's very clear that the escalation path really hasn't been established for, if you see something, say something. That might be breach, but what are we looking for, and who do we need to say something to? And then again, just to kind of to hit on lack of security monitoring and visibility, definitely a big gap and indicator of risk in these environments. All right, Derek, let me kick over to you to start going through some of those security myths, and then start talking about the roadmap as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Justin, and thanks for sharing all those photos. I think especially your story about the upstream provider in West Texas, the interesting part of that too, which gets into the visibility and layered controls, which I'll talk about later, is that probably looked like legitimate traffic. It looked like a legitimate login from your admin on the HMI. And how would you be able to see if it's just your actual admin or anyone coming up in, like you said, in an F-250 and some flare gear? It's an interesting thing for these environments on how you need to layer controls, because not everything, these environments are not the same as our IT environments. And OT security is getting more and more notoriety just due to some of the high profile hacks like JBS Foods and Colonial Pipeline and emerging regulation from the TSA. So I wanted to combat some common myths that we hear kind of talking to either clients, family members, or just other cybersecurity professionals. And if you can go to the first myth, Justin, if it's air gapped, it's secure. I understand that there is absolutely a risk reduction whenever you, Justin, if you're able to switch to the next slide, I'm not seeing it on my end. I understand that there's absolutely a risk reduction in air gapping your environments. And I have a definition at the top, which is restricting all communications between IT and OT networks. There would be a reduced risk if that were to take place, but that does not mean it is completely secure. For your West Texas example, Justin, that could have been an air-gapped network, and without physical security controls and additional monitoring controls, the air gap would not have stopped a random attacker from just driving up to the site and logging on with the password that's written on the whiteboard. I cringe a little bit inside anytime I hear somebody say, "Oh, we have an air-gapped network." I'm like, do you really? Because I think it is, in my experience, having done this the last 10 years, I don't think I could count. I don't even think I can count the number of times that I've actually seen an air gap fully implemented, because there's just a lot of operational needs with the, IT/OT convergence, with needing to get production data into your data historians and to run analytics, and for accounting purposes on the corporate side. It is very rare to see an actual air gap fully implemented. Other security controls besides network security are still needed. You still need host level visibility. You still need to restrict the usage of USB to only appropriate workstations and individuals. You still need physical security, because it's one of the golden rules, is that if you have physical access to a device, you now own that device. And back to the visibility component, which is going to be a very common theme for Justin and I in this talk, is how are you getting visibility? If it's air gapped, do you have an on-site SOC that is actually monitoring all the host and network level alerts that are coming in? Do you have a cybersecurity team with forensic capabilities on staff to identify your, air gapped and siloed network? And insider threats can still have a massive impact. Even if you have legitimate access with malicious intent, is still a big impact, and something that still could happen even if your network between IT and OT is air gapped. If you go to the next slide, please, Justin. Another common thing that I hear a lot is, well, why don't we just use the same controls for OT as we do for IT? I mean, we have meaningfully shifted right the defenses that we have in our cybersecurity industry, with like endpoint detection and response and network monitoring. Why can't we just do some of these same things for OT? There's a lot of kind of issues with that. One is legacy operating systems may not be compatible with modern cybersecurity controls and tools. You may not be able to use your current EDR software on a Windows XP or Windows 2000 machine. And attacker goals are different for OT systems compared to IT systems. With your OT systems, you're trying to typically, as an attacker, cause harm or drive some sort of response from the company, whether it's like a ransomware and you're trying to get financial gain, or you're trying to cause reputational harm. Those goals are different than in the IT environment, and you need to have controls that are appropriate. Physical security is more important, in my opinion, in the OT environments compared to IT environments. A lot of IT environments, you have a lot of network security controls. Like for my organization, I'm working from home right now with my with my internet connection at home. There's a lot of secured VPN, etc., EDR type of controls that are all internet based and orchestrated to be able to protect my device. For an OT system, that HMI is not going anywhere. It is physically connected with serial Ethernet, etc., cables to the sensors and controllers within its environment. So that's why physical security becomes more and more important. Also, these systems are typically less stable and able to handle agents or able to handle scans. There can be operational impacts if you try to run a subnet scan with Nessus. You could easily take down a plant, or you could, and again, that could, draws in, it identifies its own vulnerabilities there, but these are typically less stable operating systems and environments. So some of your security controls are going to have to be more detective and less protective in nature. Finally, in the OT environment, safety is the paramount goal. It is making sure that no matter what, whatever happens on your HMIs, whatever happens in your IT environment, that no matter what, we have a safe, reliable operation for this environment, because otherwise there could be impacts to health and safety. And next slide. If it's a legacy system, there's nothing you can do to secure it. We might as well just throw in the towel, just do whatever we can, using the last talk for guidance on like getting our executives to sign the 7-8 figure check to make sure that we can just replace it. Although modern cybersecurity controls may not be compatible with legacy operating systems, there's still things you can do. Layer defense and depth controls, such as network security controls, physical security controls, identity and access, can significantly reduce operational risks. If there are particularly fragile services and systems, segment them and segment it to the point where there's only the authorized connection. One of the things that's good about baselining an OT environment from a network perspective is there's not a lot of variety. It's a lot of the inputs and outputs and connections are going to be the same day to day. If there's a new sensor connecting to your control system, I think you can find out pretty quickly from your operators on site whether that's legitimate or not. When there's an inability to use digital security controls, physical security controls can really be a help. Let's say, for example, you have a HMI software that you just are unable to have multiple accounts on it, or the password can't be changed. And we see software like this, and it's very expensive and costly, and to update it. And even if there also has to be a software to update to. We're running these environments have a very specific operational purpose. We're building products, we're mixing chemicals, we're making food and beverage. Like, there might not be a software that's been created outside of the one that's legacy and horribly insecure. So what can you do to secure it? You can use more physical security controls, making sure that you have CCTV cameras on the workstations to see who's actually making those changes. You can restrict remote access to where it's only physical access provides you the ability to manage these control systems and sensors. Have badge access to and from the room so that you have better assurance and understanding of who's actually making changes on these systems. If you go to the next slide, please. The next myth is our organization isn't important enough to be a target. I could not disagree more with that myth. Every organization has a mission and a purpose, and there can either be a disruption for monetary or reputational gain. And there is absolutely a reason why an attacker would want to disrupt your OT environment. Attackers also typically target companies with weak controls, regardless of industry or financial importance. If your Siemens system is available over the internet, I guarantee you're going to get a lot of attack on it, because attackers go for what's easiest first and then go for higher financial and reputational gains after that. Operational incidents are also highly disruptive. You can think your organization may not be important enough, but when an operational incident happens, it's really disruptive to operations. It's costly. It impacts public reputation negatively, and there could be an impact to health and safety of the personnel on site. So when that happens, it's going to be a bad day for everyone involved. And actually, this last one, your executives will not feel the same way about how unimportant your organization is after there's been an attack. And we'll go to the next slide, please, Justin. And the final myth is we need a local cybersecurity team and the latest tools in order to have a safe, secure environment. And not necessarily. Your OT teams don't need a 8-figure budget in order to secure your OT environment and your important control systems and sensors. Layered defenses for physical security, physical access, logical access can go a long way towards reducing the attack surface. On-site engineers are also very well versed in operational risks. As part of their job as a process control engineer or operational process engineer, they need to identify what the particular risk levels are for operations. If we use the Oldsmar, Florida example, your engineers understand for a water treatment plant what levels of lye in the water are unsafe, what level of particles are unsafe, and they have a risk-based methodology in how they build their processes out. They just need some coaching on what some of the cybersecurity risks are and how we can work towards shared goals together to having a more safe, secure environment. Safety controls can typically be implemented through the applications without the need of expensive cybersecurity tools and monitoring overhead. And logging and monitoring, I like using the fancy tools like Clarity, Nozomi, Dragos, Tenable OT. They provide great visibility and great value add, but you can still use out-of-the-box monitoring capabilities to see what's going on in your environment, to baseline expected connections. Many of the OT applications, your control system servers, have some level of like application monitoring in place as far as like where authorized connections are in place. You can use your network switches and routers to understand what traffic is currently happening within your OT environments, and your firewall traffic to understand what's attempting to go to and from your OT networks. And most of your host operating systems, even if it's that old Windows 7 machine, there's still host operating system logs that you can leverage to better get logging and monitoring capabilities. If we go to the next slide, Justin, and I'm going to take a quick pause because I see a couple of questions here in the Discord channel. The first one I think is more of just a comment: is your environment resilient enough to withstand human error? Probably not, which is why you need to have all these additional monitoring capabilities in place so that you understand that whenever there is, like, for example, in the Oldsmar water plant, whenever there's an attempt to add too much lye to the water, that people can catch that, because even if an authorized user on an authorized software made that attempt, it's still not good. And there needs to be checks and balances to understand and identify human error. How or can you back up configurations in your OT environment? How can you check if it's changed? From a configuration perspective, I would first start with your OT applications. Some of those applications have tools already in them in order to have change logs to understand who made changes when, and to back up your configurations. You can also save off your project files and just do diffs between the two files, your configuration files, to see what changes were made and map that back to your management of change process. And then the last question is visibility. How can you capture net flow to and from your devices? I'd say kind of best practice, typically start with your span ports and of your switches, and just try to mirror and get network traffic off of there, and then use net flow analysis tools like Silk to better understand kind of your noisiest transactions. If we go next slide, please. So let's talk about practical recommendations. One, and these are risk ranked. One is prioritizing your locations and facilities by business risk. A couple different ways to do that. One is, what are your revenue generating facilities? What are your supply chain impact facilities? If you're an organization of larger size, let's say you have 50 manufacturing sites, and one of your sites builds components for the other 40 sites to use, then that's going to have a higher risk from a business perspective, since it's a critical path and a critical point of failure for your other sites. Identify assets within the OT environment. You can't protect what you don't know about. So that's definitely an area that we view as very highly important. Securing VPN or remote access. If you cannot have secured encrypted channels into your environment, it's going to be abused, and it's going to be one of the first ways that attackers try to gain access into your OT environments. We talked about network segmentation. This one is highly important just because there's a lot of risks and threats that can come from the IT environment. Your IT environment has much more connected devices, a larger attack surface, and working with your process control engineers to understand what that appropriate segmentation and DMZ should be. I'm certainly of the opinion that we should not air gap all the things because IT and OT shall never meet. There are a lot of really important efficiency gains from having your IT and OT networks being able to communicate in a very restricted, appropriate, business approved manner, so that you can get that production data out of your OT environments into your IT environments for greater analytics and greater understanding of trends. Restrict access controls permissions on a least privilege basis. If you're able to enforce role-based segmentation on your applications, fantastic. Please do that as often as you, for whatever applications, systems, domains that you can. Gaining network monitoring visibility. I've harped on this on a couple of slides here. It's really important to be able to understand what you have in your OT environments, what's happening, so you can respond appropriately. And then finally, once you've kind of gotten all these other things, now let's get to the fun stuff. Let's identify what our vulnerabilities are. Start with your publicly available exploits. Start with your vulnerabilities that are most accessible from an outside in perspective. Justin, I'm going to ask if you have any additional comments on the slides that I've gone through, or any other recommendations towards building a safe, reliable OT environment.
Yeah, I appreciate you walking through this, Derek, and I love this list. I think there's other things we can be doing, but this is going to offset. We fix these things, or we put in controls around these areas, and we've addressed a lot of what we need to defend against. The thing that I will say, I throughout the presentation, we mentioned a couple times about there being kind of a lack of collaboration, or maybe competing priorities between IT and OT. One of the things that I would maybe, that ties all of this together is, my experience has been that the folks in the operations or the automation teams are not opposed to cybersecurity. In fact, they're open to it, especially if you can articulate how a more secure environment helps with their metrics that they're evaluated and compensated on, right? Which is going to be efficiency and uptime and safety. And cybersecurity absolutely can be a contributor into ensuring that those things happen. And so there's just a big education piece and a lot of opportunity for a middle ground, right? I have heard too many times that a cyber team walks a plant site and they see a server and they go, "That's not my server. I don't know what that is. You can't have it," right? And they rip it out, or they try to come down in a heavy-handed manner. What that really needs to be is, hey, what is that server doing, right? We need to understand there is likely a good reason that something was put into place to achieve an objective, to help get visibility, to pull data out of something, to communicate with the device. And so there's likely a way that we can still achieve what operations needs in order to support the business, but then do it in a secure manner. We likely have got in our organization tools at our disposal and things we can use to help, but there's going to have to be a common understanding there. There's going to have to be communication. There's going to have to be open dialogue. There's going to have to be sort of established roles and responsibilities. And so I know that that kind of feels elementary and not very technical, but that is it's an often glossed over aspect of how to make sure that you have a successful program. And more often than not, I don't see that happening. And you throw all the tools in the world at the solution and technical, you implement a framework and you assess your facilities and you start trying to push remediation. But unless you're getting input from the folks on the operation side, it's just never going to be successful. And so that's kind of be the last thing I'll add to tie all this together. Any final questions that you see, Derek, in the QA? It looks like the QA, nothing in the QA here. Anything else in Discord or anything else you'd mention as a wrap up? I don't know, we're like right at time now.
No, nothing in the Discord. We have some, clapping emojis. So I think good feedback from the group and the Discord throughout. Thank you everybody for the time. As I mentioned in the Discord, I'll mention here, if you guys have any questions that pop up after this call, feel free to reach out on the Discord. Feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. This is all we do every day is talk about OT security. So we love talking about this stuff, and there's a really important mission around that, which is ensuring safe, reliable operations for the most important things in the world. So if y'all want to connect afterwards, please reach out. And thank you again for the B-Sides committee for helping us get set up with this and for putting on this conference. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much for that excellent talk. We're just going to make a transition here, so give us a couple minutes.